Welcome to I'm Not Joking, the podcast where a behavioral scientist examines what it's like to live a humorous life. Glimpse into the lives of the funniest people in entertainment, business, and science as your host, Dr. Peter McGraw, explores their habits, motivations, and secrets to success. Get ready to fire up your brain and your funny bone. Now, here's your host.
Welcome to I'm Not Joking, the podcast that looks at the lives of funny people. I'm Peter McGraw. Today's guest is Dan Ariely. Dan is the James B. Duke Professor of Psychology and Behavioral Economics at Duke University and a founding member of the Center for Advanced Hindsight. He's the best-selling author of Irrationally Yours, Predictably Irrational, The Upside of Irrationality, and The Honest Truth About Dishonesty. Welcome, Dan.
Hi, good to have you here.
So, Dan, if you weren't working as a professor, researcher, speaker, or author, what would you be doing?
You mean if I had to pick a different career or just everything else?
Yeah.
So I really love biology. I think that there have been so many interesting advances in biology, all the way from molecular biology to genetics to the role of bacteria in our lives. And I'm a little bit disappointed I'm not getting to take part in that journey. So that's on one hand. But it's kind of strange. I picked academia because I thought it's a profession that fits my disability. So as you know, I was injured very badly, and after I was in hospital for about 3 years, and when I left the hospital, I started studying physics and math at the university. And in high school, I could do physics and math in my head. I didn't need to write anything. University, not so easy. I had to, and my hands I couldn't hold anything in my hands. So I used to have somebody writing for me. So I had somebody on the blackboard, and I would dictate equations for them. Turns out really not a good way to do math and physics. So after a year, I said
epsilon.
Yes.
I said epsilon.
No, but you erase, you go back. It's such a strange.
I've seen Good Will Hunting. I know how this stuff works.
Okay. So I went to study philosophy and psychology, and I really found that it really fits my life. So on days when I had treatment, I would work less. On days I didn't have treatment, I would work more. Mm-hmm. I could work in any place I wanted. There was something about the flexibility of, I think, academic life and disability that the first thing that attracted me was not, I'm designed to be an academic, but the first thing was to, given my disability, the ups and downs in my ability and so on, what can I do? And it just became a really good path. So I think I could have been an entrepreneur. But I need something where I could control
your schedule,
my schedule, and change it when needed.
Yes. So I want to go back. So I want to ask you about both of those things. So you talk about biology. So I'm really fascinated. I haven't admittedly followed it very much, but like suddenly your gut.
Yes.
Like, we as people in the world of behavioral economics, judgment and decision making, talk about your gut as instincts and your feelings and so on.
And all of a sudden, the gut is a zoo. It's a universe. Lots of things are happening in your gut. It's an active place, crowded.
Yes, and there's now this thing called gut health, and the notion that that your GI tract has major implications for the quality of your life, I think is fascinating.
Yeah. So there's a lot of bacteria on us and in us, and they are part of us, and they are part of what functions. So, for example, there was this very disturbing paper on Diet Coke that says, look what happens when you drink Diet Coke. When you drink Diet Coke, it gives you lower calorie than regular Coke. Mm-hmm. That sounds good.
Yes.
But it also kills your gut bacteria.
Is that right?
And what happens? Are you drinking Diet Coke?
I haven't drank soda since I was like 15.
Okay. So what happened is that it's really good to get less calories, but it also killing your gut bacteria. And what your gut bacteria does for you is to process food later on. So it's short-term versus long-term. Short-term, you're getting less calories, but long-term, you're killing your ability to digest, basically. So overall, the argument is drinking Diet Coke is a recipe to actually gaining weight rather than losing weight, because we are not the only ones processing our food. Our gut bacteria does it as well. And if we take it out, everything is much more difficult.
Yeah, it's super interesting.
But by the way, there's also some results now, or at least beginning results, on the role of gut bacteria in mental health. So early days, lots of things to discover, but this whole idea that we're not alone, it's not
in
just
our bodies.
That's right. In our bodies, we're not alone. There's other entities, and those entities have interesting dynamics with us. They do things to our smell.
Mm-hmm.
They do things for resistance to allergenics. They do things to the way we process food. They do things to regulate our mood. All kinds of things happen. And how do we get to treat those entities with respect so we can, work together rather than work against each other? There's a company I particularly love called Day 2. It's an Israeli company. The research there comes from the Weizmann Institute.
Okay.
And what they've done is they basically take people and they start with insulin resistance. And they give people insulin measurements, right? So you have a blood glucose measurement that you walk with. And they basically document what you eat, what's your insulin is, your blood glucose level, right? So what you eat, what your blood glucose level is, and what your gut bacteria. And they're trying to understand the relationship between the three.
I see.
And it turns out that you and I, if we have different gut bacteria, the effect of food on our blood sugar level will be different because it goes through the bacteria.
I see.
And once they've done this to a lot of people, now you say, okay, we understand that mechanism. Now we can just look at Pete. We can analyze your gut bacteria. And we can tell you, based on your gut bacteria, what kind of things should you eat and shouldn't you eat.
Yeah.
So with diabetes, which is one of the most frightening diseases out there, a part of the issue is not just what we eat, but how much we eat. So it's a combination of what we eat and how much we eat. And then I can tell you, given your gut bacteria, some things are much better for you and much worse. For me, it's not like one size fits all.
Yeah, I think my gut bacteria don't like nachos as much as I do.
but the question is, are there things that would surprise you that you like, and your gut bacteria would say do more of it?
Do more of.
Should I turn the phone off? What do you think?
Sure, that's fine. So I'm actually going to ask a question while you do that. So, actually, I'm going to make a comment. I a few years ago had a very spicy Thai chicken fried rice meal, and it destroyed my GI tract. It's so much so that for at least 2, maybe 3 weeks, I had major problems.
But it destroyed the bacteria, or just gave you also a feeling of
I think it affected the bacteria or something.
Well?
It affected. Well, what happened? What the symptoms I had after it was, I would start the day normally. I could eat breakfast. And then by 1, 2 p.m., when everything was kind of going through, I had pain, lethargy.
Wow.
I had so I could work normally. I could have a normal day till about 2 p.m. And then for the rest of the day, I was ruined.
Wow, that's so interesting.
And first of all, it scared the hell out of me because I didn't know, is this permanent? And then it was, the thing is I just realized there are people who have IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, who have GI problems. How profound it is, not just to your GI tract, but to your energy level, your brain, your comfort, and
absolutely.
so on. It really did scare me, and it made me much more appreciative of, I think, a pretty healthy gut. This idea of what we think is good. I mean, certainly this is always changing, right? So there was a time where fat was the enemy. Now sugar is the enemy and fat is good. We have these changes. So a mutual friend of ours, I was having lunch with him, Owen Amir, was telling me about what's happening with sunlight. Mm-hmm. There's all this, so for a long time, most of the time, the sun is a scary thing. It's going to give you cancer, especially for pale white boys like me. And now there's this emerging research that getting sun has all these other benefits that far outweigh the risk of melanoma, because that's a very low
probability event.
Probability, and also it's very treatable.
Yeah.
Too. It's not like other forms of
Yeah,
cancer.
it's all. There is. We do live in a complex biological system. I remember there was a study where they took people and treated them. This was in Africa, and they treated them for iron deficiency. Right, iron deficiency seemed like a bad thing to have.
Yeah, it sounds terrible.
It turns out when you're iron deficient, your body is less likely to attract disease.
Whoops.
So for all kinds of other reasons, yes. So I think this idea that kind of good and bad,
yes,
X is good, X is bad, is really good psychologically, right? It's like how we make sense of the world.
Indeed.
Sunlight is bad. Moderation is something we don't do well with.
Yes.
Right? It says do some but not too much, and how do you and it's multiple benefits and multiple costs, and you have to weigh them. And I think the world is like that, right? If anything in kind of homeostasis, equilibrium, it's never the answer is that living in darkness is always bad. It's about finding the right mix, and that's going to be very tough for us to act on. Because the things we're good in acting are things that are deterministic. Do X, don't do Y. This is how religion works. You have a rule. And if you say get exposed to some sunlight but not too much,
yes,
how are we going to do it? If we're going to say, look, eat some fat but not too much, again, very, very difficult. But that's reality.
Yeah, yes, it is. I think also, it's not like science helps, because what reviewer A, B, and C want is to isolate this one variable and show that more is good and less is bad, or vice versa. That's
right. So we often have the tendency to break things into small components and look at them one at a time. And I wouldn't say science is not helpful. I think it's this reductionist version.
That's fair.
Of science is not helpful. So if you look at even in psychology, there are people who do holistic representations, even in child psychology and so on, and they say, let's not take this reductionist approach. Let's look at the organism in the environment, and let's not do an abstraction and so on. And for many things, especially for biological systems, I think it's right. But here is what I would say for to save science. I would say it's good to start with understanding the factors in isolation, but we can't stop there. In the same way that in my own research, I'm happy to study things as individual components, right, in the lab, but then we go to the field.
Yes.
And we say, if you plug this into people's life, does it still have the same effect? Does it run out against other things? So one example, it's easy to get people to save some money. Right? So we did some studies on how to get low-income people to save some of their tax refund from the government. Relatively easy to do. The question is, are you affecting them negatively in other ways? Right? So imagine I got people to save 100% of the tax rebate.
Mm-hmm.
Will they take more credit card debt
right.
as a consequence of that, or pay less debt? And we figured out that we can get people to save about a third without hurting their other aspects.
I see. That saving more is not necessarily bad. And that is very good, excuse me.
That's right. Up to a third, all good. Above a third, you can cut into other things. So when low-income people get tax rebate, which, by the way, is usually almost twice as the regular monthly income, right? It's the biggest paycheck of the year. The ideal is to put a third of it into saving, a third of it to pay debt, and a third to spend. And the third to spend is just because life is not just about misery; you need some happiness.
Yeah, these people are under consuming.
Yeah, not enjoying life sometimes, and doing something is helpful. But that's the exact mix. Now, can we, if we studied just saving in isolation, can we get them to save more? Absolutely. Would we hurt the other things? Absolutely as well. So, and I think that as we move from lab research to the field, it's going to be more and more this way. In the same way that if we studied gut bacteria in a Petri dish, we would not understand the whole complexity of what's going on. Or if we studied melanoma, skin cancer separately, we wouldn't. We need to do more of those big field studies in in vivo, and this is where technology is really helping us. So think about our field. I think that the biggest revolution to our field has been actually technology. Why? It allowed us to step out of the lab and into life. So before that, we wanted to study auctions, very few auctions out there. Now there's eBay.
Yes.
Think about the amount of data you had. You want to study dating, very difficult. Now there's like million sites out there with different flavors and possibilities. So our ability to go into life and study things in real life, first of all, it made the study more interesting, right? We don't have to study gambles and abstract things. We can study real phenomena.
Yes.
But also we get much more interesting data. So I think we in decision making are moving into that.
I agree. I was just telling some first year grad students that I think that the future of the paper in our field will be a mix of lab studies and secondary data. The journals aren't quite ready for it because they don't know how to structure reviewers for that. But I think I agree with you. I think that's where it is.
And it will give us richness back into our theories. Everybody would benefit from it.
I completely agree. So the other thing you said was that you'd be an entrepreneur.
Yes.
And I think I like that answer in part because I never was entrepreneurial until I got like 10 years into my career. And now I think I would answer this question in a similar way. I never thought of myself as entrepreneurial, but now I do. And so I'm here at the Center for Advanced Hindsight, and this place feels like a startup. Mm-hmm. It feels like a place on Pearl Street where, like people are going through their Series A and they're hiring people, and there's open places to work and then closed offices and couches and foosball tables and so on. So this place feels like a startup. And good coffee. I did have some coffee. This place feels like a startup. And so is that where your answer about I'd be an entrepreneur comes from? Because you sort of are a professorial entrepreneur.
Yeah. So I have three lives. So I have a life here at Duke, and the Center for Advanced Hindsight. We do mostly research on financial decision making and health.
Yes,
about 60%, mostly the US, some in Africa, a little bit in Europe, a little bit of China. And we decided to be an applied research center. So when you talk,
who's we?
Me, me and the bacteria, No, but Mariel, Julie, and Ting are the three leaders of the lab of the three areas: the health, financial, and international, and Aline as well. And we decided a few years ago to try and specialize, and decided to measure our impact by how many people we help and by how much.
Okay, so this is a little like the Gates folks do this kind of stuff, right? Like
the Gates folks have different
goals, but they have a measure.
Things that change, but they have a measure of their approach, and we are doing the same thing. So we're saying, look, academic papers are great. If we can do them, that's great. But the first hurdle to whether we're going to do a project is like how many people can we influence if we are finding something, and by how much, and that's our measure. So that's life number one, and it's entrepreneurial from the perspective that our mission is to do good.
Yes,
doing good in all kinds of ways, great. Mostly we try to focus on health and financial. US, some in the rest of the world, and if you have any project on that you say fits that, that's great. We're open to this. My second life is I have a group in Israel. Here we're about 40 people. There we're about 20 people that works exclusively with the government. And the government once a year comes to us with big topics, and we pick 5 topics we want to work on, and we just do research and come up with solutions and so on. And it's a group of social scientists, designers, and computer scientists, and we try to develop apps and websites and technologies and solutions, things. And it's very nice, right? You say, here's a problem, go at it.
Yeah, it's exciting.
And it could be all the way from transportation to education to land disputes.
And do you keep a year timeline? Do you try to keep it within a year?
So our contract with the government is that every year they come to us with new projects.
But in terms of the time to solution?
It varies.
I see.
It really varies on what we think is the right time horizon for the project. Some of them would take more, some would take less. Mostly, but I think it's a good thing to aim for. And then I do have some startups. So whenever I have an idea that nobody else picks up, I do a startup. So right now I have 3 startups that I started. I also advise 2 other startups in a heavy way. I help lots of people, but kind of
these are tech startups mostly.
Yep, all.
Oh, I mean, I guess I like to say that every company is a tech company now.
So one company, just to give you an example, one company is a food company. We have a device we call Genie, a little bit like an espresso machine, but it makes food. And we start from a very basic point of view. We said it's all about portion control. You have to rate the right amount of food.
Mm-hmm. So if you make the right amount of food, then you eat the right amount of food.
That's right. And it has to be quick. Can't take more than 2 minutes. So we have a machine, Genie, that makes healthy food with no preservatives, no additives, between 1 minute to 2 minutes, depending on the dish. It makes a range of things from pasta with all kinds of things to quinoa to chocolate souffle to soups.
I'm writing down my address so you can send me a beta version of that.
Yeah. So that's one company, and it's been really, really exciting because there's lots of elements, right? There's the elements of the technology itself, the machine. There's the elements of the food and quality. There's the elements of habit creation. So lots of things are really interesting. A second company is also in health. We created a scale with no display. It's the wood color thing that you see over there.
Yeah, I'll try to take a picture of that for
that's also comes from social science. So health, something you need to think about every day.
Mm-hmm.
Something to start in the morning. You can't start after lunch. So we said, okay, scale is a really good Trojan horse, right? Also, there's kind of recall and recognition. The recognition is when you see something and it gets the idea in your mind. Recall is when you think about something yourself. Most things, we need something to remind us. One of the things that happened in the digital revolution is that things are an app on our phone on page 4, and they're not part of our physical environment. And people sometimes think it's enough. It's not enough. We need to remind people about our existence. So a bathroom scale is a really good thing. Now, what do we know about the bathroom scale? 3 things. The first thing, it's really good to step up on the scale every morning.
Mm-hmm.
Why? You remind yourself that you want to be healthy. Like you step on the scale, it's like a little ritual, and say, okay, let's eat a little bit less for breakfast. The second thing is weight fluctuates a lot. How much salt when you went to the bathroom, if you're a woman, menstrual cycle. And that creates the opposite of loss aversion, right? So we have this principle in behavioral economics, losses loom larger than gain. In weight, it's the opposite, right? Gains is the negative side.
Yes.
So imagine somebody doesn't change their weight, they just go up and down, up and down. The up days are really miserable.
Yes.
The down days are slightly happy. On average, not good news.
Indeed.
Right.
Yes.
And that's why most people don't like their bathroom scales. Right? It's like you experiencing this fluctuation. The trend is very slow. The fluctuations are very large. And then the third thing, and we've done this on lots of healthcare projects, people expect their bodies to react very quickly. So,
and it just takes forever to change your body, especially as you get older.
Yeah. So you've been on a diet for 2 days. You step on the scale and say, I've been on a diet since yesterday morning.
And I've gotten heavier. Yeah.
What's going on here? It's not working, right? Clearly. And then you do a diet for 3 days and nothing happened. And then you take 2 days off and now your weight goes down. So we said, look, the regular scale is confusing and demotivating. Let's do a scale with no display. Let's get people to step on the scale. And if they step on the scale, we say, congratulations. You stood on the scale. You've done your job.
Mm-hmm.
And then we give people feedback on an app, but it's the trend over the last 3 weeks. And what's the good thing about the trend over the last 3 weeks? It eliminates the noise.
Yes, this is the narrow bracketing work on investments, right? So if you look at your stock portfolio every
all
day,
the time,
same thing. Yeah. But you're good if you look at the end of the year, you're usually happy.
That's right. So we also decided to do it on a 5-point scale and to celebrate no bad news.
I see.
Right. So in health, no bad news is great news.
Yeah, the status quo is
it's
good.
Fantastic, right?
Yes,
in many other cases, it's not, but here it is. So we say 5-point scale. Great news, nothing bad happened. The trend for the last week slightly worse, much worse, slightly better, much better. That's it. And we did a test in 4 call centers. So we took people that are difficult to change their behavior, right? Low income, relatively obese, don't do much throughout the day.
sit a lot. Yeah.
And the people who got the regular scale with the decimals, you're 252.3, gain 0.3% of their body weight every month for 5 months.
I see.
It didn't slow down, just continuous increase. The people who got R scale lost 0.6 every month for 5 months. Right? So you can say, 0.6 is not enough. First of all, stopping the increase is great.
Yes.
And it's a really nice increase. And for me as a social scientist, it's really nice, right? It's nice to say, let's look at everyday objects.
Yes.
And say, how can we think about them from a social science perspective? Now, with the scale, we used to have these mechanical scale with a thick needle. And that was actually okay. Then we moved to digital. We said, let's stick the display in the same place and give people 2 decimals. Not necessarily the right thing. We have this data revolution with lots of information about ourselves. What information should we provide people at what resolution? Just because we can measure something doesn't mean that that's the right thing to give people to make decisions.
Yeah. So where did the insight? So I think the scale's brilliant. Where did the insight come from? Was it the study about looking at your stock portfolio? Was it this idea of what can we subtract from an everyday item? Where did this idea come from?
So this interest this came from 2 separate interests. One is in decision making we say a lot, reward what people do, not what the outcome in a stochastic way. And there's all kinds of old research about multiple Q probability learning, about how people get confused and so on. So that was one piece that has been on my mind for a really long time, for all kinds of things, right? Connected to the stock market, weight, blood pressure, blood sugar level. And then when we did the studies about how quickly people expect the feedback to be, we said, okay, now we need to finish something. And the scale is one way, but there's lots of other places where we need to use that approach.
Yeah, I like to say to my students that when you're worried that like all the good ideas are taken, one of the things you should do is let's look at an everyday object that hasn't changed in the last 50 years or has only changed a tiny bit, and think about how you can completely. But like what I often say is people don't buy vacuum cleaners; they buy clean floors.
Yeah.
And if you start thinking
this way,
if you start thinking in this way, is people don't buy scales; they're trying to buy health.
That's right.
And so,
right now with the scale, we discovered also that 79% of our population, and again, not easy population, stood up on the scale 5 times or more. 5 times or more per week.
Okay.
And that's amazing adherence rate. So now we're trying to think of it as a Trojan horse into health more generally, and not just weight. Right? If people step on a scale and open an app and curious about something about their health, what else?
Yeah, you're counting their steps and you're doing these other things that might be integrated into that.
Yeah. And then the third startup I have, which is the most ridiculous one from my perspective, it's a hedge fund.
Oh, is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
So I got data about how companies treat their employees.
I love this idea already.
And going back to 2006 until today, hundreds of companies, and I just looked at the data. And imagine that you have multiple dimensions, right? So one dimension could be quality of furniture, quality of coffee, equality of salary between men and women, how transparent people feel the company is, how much they understand their promotion, all kinds of things. And it turns out that if you do the following simulation, you say, let's imagine that it's 2006, the day I got the first data. And I sorted the companies who do best on an attribute, quality of coffee, to the worst. And I buy at the prices of that day in the stock market, the 20% companies who treat their employees best on that dimension. And I just keep their stocks. And in 2007, I got new data. And one company moved up, one moved down, and I changed. And I hold a portfolio of companies who do best on quality of coffee, quality of furniture, quality of salary, 80 different dimensions.
Okay.
And then I compare from 2006 to 2017.
Yes.
How do they do compared to the S&P 500?
I'm assuming better.
So how many of them do you think do better than the S&P?
I have no idea.
All but one.
Okay.
Now, that's shocking. Yeah. Now, we don't have to use all of those, right? And this is each of the building blocks separately.
But you're doing a hedge fund, so you're going to be shorting.
Wait.
Sorry, I'm excited.
Patience. So first of all, it means that I couldn't find, aside from one attribute, and that it does just a tiny bit worse than the S&P 500. Almost everything you can measure does better. Like I'm telling you about all my ingredients, right? It's not that I ran a million simulations and showed you the 3 that worked. I'm talking about, here's my building blocks.
Mm-hmm.
All my building blocks, aside from one, do better on the upside than the S&P. Some a little bit better, some a lot better, and the same thing is true for the downside, right? So if you
Like the bond 20.
Bond 20, they don't do so well compared to the S&P. Now all but 2 do worse than the S&P 500. So we came up with a strategy where we buy the companies who treat their employees well and short the companies who don't.
And who's we?
Me and a partner.
Someone who has deep pockets?
No, not deep pockets, but actually understand something about finance.
That's a good idea. Okay.
So we have a long fund and a long short fund. When we started, the results was just so nice, and together we went to some hedge funds. There are lots of people who manage lots of money. We say, hey, why don't you? It wasn't clear that the right thing to do is to open a hedge fund for somebody to use that data. But what happened is that lots of people were excited and they wanted to do something with us, but they wanted to combine that plus financial data.
Okay.
And you can imagine why, because if you just do
more predictors are better typically.
That's right.
Yeah.
But we didn't want to. Why? Because I want to go and say, look at my strategy. So the long strategy, historically, on that period, does 12% over the S&P per year. Now we'll see what will happen moving forward. But if you look at this and you say what's going on here, if it was a mix of human capital and money, you never know which one it is. But for me as an ideology, I want to go to investors and say, I don't look at quarterly earnings.
I don't need to.
Earnings. No, I'm sure it will do better. I'm sure there's more signal there, right? Yes. But I say, look at how much we've neglected human capital. And that's the important thing, right?
Yes.
And I have all these funny discussions with people and they say, we're fundamental investors. And I say, what do you mean by fundamental investing? What's the engine of growth of a company? Like, where is it coming from? You say fundamental, like what? Is it coming from the balance sheet? No, it comes from human capital. It's ingenuity, it's care, it's interest. Well, and another thing I did was I said, imagine we were designing annual reports. You as an investor have a way to tell companies what you want them to tell you. Don't you want to know about how they're treating the employees, how excited people are? But nevertheless, we have this system that came out of an accounting.
Yes.
Just because this is what we do in the accounting system, that's the easy thing to put in the annual report. That's not what we really want.
Well, yeah, the way I sort of back this out is, when you talk about what does a CEO do, right? To me, a CEO does 3 things.
Mm-hmm.
They raise money.
Yep.
And it's why so many CEOs are finance people, because of that, how important that is. They decide on strategy, right? High level strategy. This is where we're taking the company. And the third thing, which I think people overlook, is they create culture.
Mm-hmm.
That is that they hire, fire, and design the way that the organization works. And though you need all 3 of those things together, right? You need money to execute strategy. You need culture to execute strategy, and you need good strategy.
Yep.
And so what you're highlighting
is the culture.
Is the culture side of this. You're quantifying the culture side of it.
Yeah, and very much so. And if you think about the gap between the minimum of work we need to do not to get fired, not us, for us,
yes.
It's really low. And the max we could do if we're very excited, that's goodwill, right? It's basically like that gap is about how much do I care about the company, and companies that are good at that, and
they extract so much more value from their
and everybody's better off. Have you ever worked at the university when you were unhappy with your dean or somebody?
Yes.
Everybody suffers.
Yes.
Right? Like all the activities that are usually joyful, like contributing to the university, happy, doing all kinds of things. All of a sudden, like, why am I doing this?
Yes.
Right? And what you want, for example, for me, have the benefit of Duke at heart. And it's not necessarily that I have it in the traditional way that everybody thinks about it, right? Here is my teaching load and here is this. Saying, I want the university to do
am I improving
better.
the brand and the experience of students and
That's
so
right.
on.
And I want to talk to alumni and I want to, whatever I do, that's like goodwill. That's like
Yes.
I care about the benefit of the university everywhere I go, and it means that I spend more time with undergrads, and it means I spend more time in
You say yes to
all
things.
kinds of things. Yeah, that are good for the university, and that's the question. The question is, how do we? What's the culture? Because incentives are not enough to get goodwill.
Yes.
What is the culture that gets people to have goodwill?
Yeah, one last comment, and then I want to ask you some other questions. I read this book. It's a series of essays by Paul Graham, and Paul's a tech guy. I think a really impressive thinker, and he talks about how difficult it is in an existing corporate structure because the assumption is that you're working as hard as possible, and so if you want, how do you create a situation where you're willing to give a 10x effort in order to get some major benefit of that? He's like, you have to leave the corporate structure because it's not set up to do that. And so, but what you're describing is not 10x, but 2x. And that can accommodate that, but it's not going to be money that does it. It's going to be these other things.
That's right.
So
and not just it's what pushes it forward, it's what are the things that we do to depress it.
Yeah, that's right. It's much easier
and sometimes we just depress it. I was in some labor negotiation in a different country, not in the US, with a group of social workers. It's the government and social workers in the labor negotiation of salary. And I asked the guy who was on the side of the social workers, if we're going to increase their salaries, but let's say $500 a month, it wasn't that amount, but let's say that. I said, what do you think they would prefer? To get the money in cash or to get it in a petty cash and allow them to spend it on the families that they try to help?
Okay.
Right? One is going into their pocket, another one is giving them money with no bureaucracy. To give as they please, this is creating autonomy. And he said 100% of them will want the cash. We actually looked at it. 80% wanted to give the money.
Is that right?
Think about the role of autonomy. You become a social worker. You're not trying to maximize.
You're not trying to get rich.
You're a good person trying to help out. And then we put you in a system that basically blocks your ability to help with bureaucracy. Right? What's the daily experience? Like, all of a sudden they say, I'm giving you a way to get out of it. $500 a month, not enough to do stuff, but all of a sudden I'm giving you trust. I'm giving you autonomy. Think about what
you can bring a book to this child who would be benefit
buy a
from this
book
book
here, give some cash here, buy groceries here, up to you completely. It's a tremendous benefit. But that's an example of the things that we do. And bureaucracy, by the way, is the enemy of goodwill. Because what do you do when you create bureaucracy? Is you say, I don't trust you.
Yes.
I don't trust you to do the right thing. I have to put all these rules on you to make sure you do exactly what you're told. And rules sometimes are good on average for most people, but not always for all cases.
My school wouldn't reimburse a plane ticket for me that I didn't follow the rules at. And it's just like, that's incredibly short-sighted.
Yes.
It's just an incredibly short-sighted thing.
Let me get another bottle of wine and we'll call it even.
So that I didn't do that just in case anyone from Colorado is listening.
Yeah, pot. So if it's pot, it's okay, right?
So Dan, I marvel. So 2004, you published your first book.
No, 2008.
Was it? Okay, 2008, you published your first book. You were early. You were a little early to this pop science world where publishers in the world were figuring out there's an appetite to translate behavioral science into something that's accessible. You've continued writing books. So I want to ask you a few questions about this stuff. So you keep writing books. Now, recently you co-wrote a book called Dollars and Cents with Jeff Chrysler.
Chrysler,
yes. Why
He's
are
a comedian, by the way.
Who's a comedian? Yes, I've been in touch with him. You're also creating other products besides books. So you have a movie, Dishonesty, that's on Netflix. You have a card game, The Irrational Game. You have apps, and so on. So why are you still doing books? Is my question.
Yeah. So first of all, I look at everything as a new adventure and something I want to learn myself. So I wrote the first 3 books relatively quickly, and then I have a column in the Wall Street Journal, like an advice column. And my next book was I teamed up with a cartoonist, and I expanded on my answers in the column because the column is a little bit limited. And he wrote cartoons about this, and it was wonderful to get my answer to a question and to think that I condensed it, and then he has like a 1 sentence in a cartoon, and he captures the whole.
That's funny, yeah.
The whole idea and more. So that was a wonderful.
Who was the cartoonist?
Will Heffley.
Okay.
And we had a really good time. He's a New Yorker. Cartoonist, very very good guy.
I haven't met him, but.
And then I got a request to write a TED book, a short book. And I thought, okay, that will be interesting as well, to try and write something much shorter, about a third of a regular book. And so that was a new adventure. Also, on that book, on Payoff, I decided to be less scientific and a bit more exploratory. So the first chapter is a very, very personal chapter about a kid I was trying to help who was badly injured, and just kind of my very difficult process through it, but also my musing. And the last chapter is about death, not something I've done research about. So I took that opportunity to have, like, the middle chapters are research chapters like we used to, and then the first one is personal experience. The last one is my musings about death and what does it say about the meaning of life and so on. So
there's a philosopher in you coming out.
That's right. So, and then working with Jeff was again a new.
He's a hoot.
Yeah. And it was really fun to work together. And now I just finished with Matt, who's here in the lab. We finished a cartoon book. So not a cartoon, an illustrated book.
Okay.
So it's mostly he's an illustrator. So it's an illustrated book with a little bit of text inside. Again, a new adventure. So
and behaviorally focused.
Yeah, it's about market norms and social norms. So the whole thing is focusing on this. What do we do for love? What do we do for money? How do we do these things? But for me, each of those is an adventure, and I do them only if I feel like I'm going to learn something new and create some value. So I don't want to do the same thing. Talks. We both give lots of talks. Mm-hmm. You give talks, it's fine. I recently teamed up with a magician in Israel.
Oh, that's a fun idea.
We have a mutual friend, and she said, "Why don't we, the two of you, meet?" We met. We really liked each other, and magicians are social scientists.
Yeah, I'm sure you've done this. Have you been to the Magic Castle in Los Angeles?
Yes,
so, I mean, that's home base for those guys. They're super interesting.
Yeah. So, I teamed up with this magician called Lior Sushard. Really amazing guy, Israeli. And we did 6 shows in Israel. And first of all, it was really fun. I learned a few magic tricks. Yeah, it was really fun. But we also, over the 6 shows, they also got much longer. We started with an hour and a half. We ended at 2.5 hours. Just because we like each other so much. And the last show we had, I really was tearing up at the end. I felt like him and I were just hanging out on stage, showing each other and talking to each other.
Yeah.
Playing. And, right now he goes more into what I say. I go into his say. I try to, read people's minds, and he does some of my stuff. And I really felt like we were just hanging out, and 2,000 people were kind enough to come and join us in our party. So I try to do things now that are expanding. I mean, life is about learning.
Yes.
Right? We have this very methodical way of learning we call experiments, but there's lots of other ways to learn. And
yes.
I'm interested in all of them, and I want to to improve myself, right? Like, how do you get good ideas and what's your experiences? So I do want to, I think I started realizing a few years ago, I want to invest more in myself as a learning tool. Like, if I want to get better, I need to do all kinds of things that are not necessarily academic papers.
Yes.
I need to try new experiences. I need to expand. I need to push myself. I need to do all kinds of things. And sometimes it brings ideas. Sometimes it's not. It's just my own enriched experience.
Yeah. I mean, to get a little personal, like, I'm really inspired by your life. Like, you are mapping, in many ways, have been, when I look to the person in the field for inspiration, it's you. And I've always appreciated your advice that you've given me. And so, like, I marvel at what you've done, because I know how hard and I work at and struggle to do what I do. And, it's these reference points. You're a difficult reference point, Dan.
You need to increase your dose of coffee, then you'll be fine.
Yeah, maybe I need to try to start taking more Adderall.
Yeah.
But in any case, so I want to press you on some ideas, though, because and this is if I ever get to having the problem that you're having, you may not even think you have a problem, but like, so your productivity is incredible. Your schedule is incredible. As you just laid out for the listener, all the things that you're working on. Any one of those single things is a full-time job. Yeah. And I see why you're doing it. You have a mission, make the world a better place, help people, live better, more healthy, prepare for the future. You have an internal, I can tell, which is just a curiosity about the world and excitement about ideas, and an idea that, like, oh, here I am, I'm 50. How can I continue to grow, right? This growth mindset flourishing in this way. But what is it like? When is it going to break? Like, the issue is, when does the weight of all these kinds of things going to start to get in the way of that? And where do you go? I need to make a major, because what's happened, forgive me if I'm rambling here, but I'm excited about this idea. So in 2008, you published your first book, New York Times bestseller, puts you on the map. You become a bit of a celebrity in the world of
the small world of academia.
The small world of, but it was it was the perfect moment, right? Corporations were ready for this.
Yep.
And so then you've been able to finance all of these kinds of things through talks and through consultings and through donation and through the power of your brand, and so on. And so you started to build, and you're building and you're building and you're building. And so the natural thing would be just to continue to build this, but the model is still built on you as creative director. I don't know the right term, CEO, whatever it might be. And so I'm curious, like, will this go on to your 60? Will you? Because I'm kind of going the other direction, where I'm going more alone. Like, I have labs and stuff like that, but, like, I'm going the opposite way, which is leaner.
Yeah. So there's multiple questions here and multiple directions.
Okay.
So first of all, I'm very lucky to work with people I love and admire, and I only work with people I really care about.
It's a good rule.
Both professionally and personally, right? So there's nobody that I work with that I wouldn't want to spend real time with, right? So that's a part of it. I also trust people a lot, and I tell them, I'm here when you need me, but I don't want you to report to me. Tell me what you're doing. I'm at your service, not the other way around. And I got hurt very infrequently, but I got hurt. Like, not too long ago, I trusted somebody, and there was a terrible thing that happened. And the beginning instinct was to say, oh, let me trust people less. And I said, no. I need to understand that trust is a really wonderful strategy. I get lots of benefit from it. I don't see it all the time, but it's an amazing strategy of everybody's happier. We get lots of work done. Things are amazing. And from time to time, there's a cost.
Sure.
But I don't want to do the things that insurance companies do, and they say, okay, I don't want anybody to cheat me, so let me make everybody's life miserable.
Yes.
Or doing that. So I have kind of a basis of trust. In terms of growth, I'm unable to handle more projects.
Okay.
So, for example, today I got an email from somebody who's doing something really interesting, close to my heart, and I just said no. I'm at the level of I can't do more.
Can I ask how you said no?
Yes. So I actually wrote a few sentences about saying no. I have a sentence of saying no to talks. I have a sentence of saying no.
So it's like pre-printed, drop and cut and paste.
Yeah. And it's actually in a shortcut on the email on responding. Responding to that. So I've made those a while ago, and I use them to say no because I have to say no. And when I write something, it's easier. My assistant Megan, she reads my email, and we have email folders for her that I move things there for her to handle. And there's a folder called Megan Say No. That's also the cases where I didn't feel comfortable saying no, and she has no problem. And also,
I know Megan. I can see that.
And there's also a folder called Megan You Decide. And I know she always says no anyway, but it feels a little easier for me.
Okay.
So I think
you're at that point.
I'm at that point. I just and I need to take a few things off my plate if I could, but there's nothing I'm willing to take off my plate yet, but I can't take it on.
Well, there's research that just says if you don't add anything, eventually things will come off your plate.
That's right. But I think the more complex part of your question for me is the question of resilience. So, a lot of the projects are not happy projects, right? A lot of the projects are dealing with very, very sad things. It's about we're not helping the happy people. It's about diabetes, and it's about
low income people. Yes,
and, low income, and it's about inequality and desperation, and there are really terrible things happening, and I think for me that's kind of the toughest one is just the exposure to the underbelly of society in so many cases, right? So when I go to Africa, I'm mostly in slums.
Yeah, you're not going on safari seeing the big five. Yes.
Yeah. So it is tough, and most of the day is spent on difficult things. And for example, we have some projects now in trying to figure out how to incorporate people with disabilities into society, and trying to figure out physical disability. It's relatively easy. Mental disability, really tough.
Oh, I could see that. Yes.
Lots of prejudice, lots of challenges. The numbers are frightening of how many people are suffering from all kinds of things. So I think for me this is a question of how do you find happiness in a world where so much of the day is exposed to difficult things. And sometimes I feel that there's like a wave of sadness that is coming over me that it's very hard to hold back just because of the exposure to that. And working many hours and not sleeping is easy compared to that part for me. And on one hand, it's a motivating power, right? Because you see so much sadness and you want to
eradicate it, sure,
to reduce it at least. On the other hand, sometimes it's too much. So that for me is the big question. You say, how long could it go on?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a question of how long can I keep this level of resilience, and look at difficult things and say, okay, let's put our sleeves up and see what we can do.
Yes.
Rather than saying this is really sad and let's start crying.
Yes. I mean, I could never I mean I could never hope to keep up with you anyways, but I certainly have focused much more on my health lately. So there's two things that I've done that have really, I think, improved my quality of life a lot. One is I've always been good about sleep. I've doubled down on my eating. I had always been okay about that, but I've really gotten much better about that. And then lately in the last few years, no, really, I've gotten much better about my exercise because I let that go to work on the humor stuff and the book and all that. I couldn't keep, you can't do everything well.
Yeah.
The other one is studying humor.
Yeah.
You know, like, so you think about it, it's like you go to a slum in Africa, I study improv at Upright Citizens Brigade. I'll tell you this, Dan. I did a 2-week intensive couple summers ago. I slept better than I had in years because for 3 hours a day, I was playing with 11 other people.
Yeah.
And as adults, we rarely ever play.
Yeah.
You know, and if we do, it's soccer and we're super competitive and angry because half the time we lose. But when you go to an improv class, you almost always win. And so, yeah, I get that, especially as you get older, you just don't have the same motor. I mean,
the magician, I do with one of his final statements to the audience every time. I'll steal it. I guess it's okay.
Yeah, sure. You're attributing it.
Borrow it, yeah. He says, we don't stop playing because we get older. We get old because we stop playing. It's such a beautiful sentiment.
There's truth to that.
But I certainly am not good on those things. I certainly don't exercise enough. I don't eat well. Certainly don't sleep. Last year, so for 2018, I traveled 300 days. I think 2017 was the same. Very hard.
Yeah, I know. I travel probably, I don't know, a quarter of that.
And when you travel, it's tough to eat well, tough to exercise, tough to sleep well.
Yes, it is.
I started hugging a pillow, which is
yeah, it's just, and you know, even when you travel business, you know, it's better, but it's still not good. It's not the same as your bed and you know, and your refrigerator and so on. Dan, I want to be conscious of time for all the reasons that we just talked about. But I always ask people on the end, what are you reading, watching, or listening to that's really good, that really stands out to you?
So I'm now listening to a book, Michael Pollan's book on psychedelics.
Yes, I've heard about this.
I'm 2/3 in. Very good book. Very good book. Really interesting. Very thought provoking.
Can I ask a thing about that? So this came up last night. So our mutual friend Janet Schwartz was talking about this book, and she made a comment about it. I don't know if it's inspired by the book or talks about in the book, is the idea that when we think about new experiences, we tend to think about going out into the world, but what psychedelics allow us to do is to have new experiences within our world.
That's right. Comes very strongly from that.
It does. Okay.
Yeah, that one. And you know, the whole notion of what's a world, what do we understand, what is this journey about, what are we really experiencing?
Right.
So that's
life in the simulation.
So that's it's a wonderful book, and it's actually really good to think about what's the range of experiences, and it also gets you to think about what's real and what's not real. Like if you have a psychedelic experience, is it real? Is it not real? Yes, your brain is doing it, but real in the sense that, is this part of our reality, even if it's induced or not? So that's one. And then I'm going to admit that I only watch TV when I'm flying. So also not all the time, but that's the only time I watch movies and TV when I'm flying. And I just downloaded Breaking Bad. I know, like, I'm 10 years behind.
Oh, yeah, right.
I know I'm 10 years behind.
Right.
But I finally downloaded it, and I'm flying tomorrow, so maybe I'll start.
You'll start watching. You know, you've told this to me before that you watch movies on a plane, and that actually, I should let you know, that was really helpful for me, because like when I was a grad student and I was an assistant professor, time on a plane I thought was like
reviewing papers.
I would review papers. Like I would do this hard ass work because, you know, you're locked in.
That's right.
This is pre-internet on the planes and all this stuff. And of course, flying is already aversive. And when you're 6'5" like me, it can be particularly aversive.
Yeah.
And so then I was doing this aversive thing on top of this aversive thing. And I remember saying, well, you know, if Dan can watch a movie,
It's okay.
then I can watch a movie. And so I still do a lot of reading and writing on planes.
Mm-hmm.
I try to make it a little more pleasurable side of the reading and writing world. But sometimes I let myself watch a movie. So again, thank you for the inspiration and for that tip about watching movies on planes.
And thanks for coming to Duke, and lovely to see you as always.
It's great. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to visit petermcgraw.org for more information about our guest, show notes, and social media links. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share with others. Join Dr. Peter McGraw next week for another fun, fascinating conversation on I'm Not Joking.
Yo.